So good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to this update on the agricultural transition. And we'll move now, please, to the first slide, which Cameron Hughes, our agricultural advisor, has very kindly organised for us. So I'm Mark Tufnell, I'm the CLA president, and we're going to be joined this evening by the programme director from Defra, Janet Hughes, and her team. We're very grateful to her for her time this evening. And we're going to start off with a policy scene setting by Cameron Hughes, who's our land use policy advisor here in Belgrave Square. Now, I should, on this particular slide, highlight to you that at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A where you're able to post questions throughout the webinar, and we hope we'll get a chance to answer your question in the Q&A session with Janet. So without any further ado, I'll go straight across to Cameron, who's going to give about a 10-minute presentation setting the scene for the agricultural transition. Over to Cameron.
That's great. Thanks very much, Mark. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. I know you'll be really eager to dive into the Q&A session, but before we did that, we thought it would be helpful just to set the scene, set a bit of context in terms of where we are in the overall grand scheme of things. So I'm going to start by setting that out in a couple of slides before moving into exactly what we understand by environmental land management as a term. We'll then pick up on some of the recent environmental land management updates that we've had at the start of the year. Quite a lot has happened already this year. And then I'll just pick up on some of the other schemes that are out there and are being launched over the course of this year as well. So it's important, I suppose, to recognise that we're midway through a long transition, a 7-year transition, about to start our 3rd year. We've had 2 years of cut BPS payments in 2021, 2022. We've got another year of cuts coming up in 2023. We know we've moved to this model of biannual payments, so half in the summer, half later on in the year. And this year's instalment is expected in August. We know that delinking is going to be introduced in 2024. So this is the final year. 2023 is the final year where you'll be required to submit a BPS application with those delink payments coming to you from 2024 to 2027 without the need to submit a claim. And of course, whilst all this is happening, whilst BPS is fading away, we've got a developing ELM offer, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. This slide is quite a helpful illustration of where we were in the previous financial year. This is based on figures that Defra shared and published towards the end of last year, showing the split of the overall budget between direct payments, you can see that in blue, and an agri-environment scheme. So you don't need me to tell you that most of the agriculture budget was going into direct payments in the previous financial year. It'll still be the same case this year as well, but we're moving away from those direct payments, and those slices of the pie are going to look quite different as we progress through the transition. As illustrated by this Defra graphic, it's a funding plan covering the years 2021 to 2025, and that dark blue in the previous slide has on this slide is shown in that light green color on the bottom. So as those direct payments fall away year on year, we know that ELM offer is building, covered by the dark green in the slide here. So what is ELMS? This is maybe quite a basic question in terms of the policy language, but it's still a question that the CLA gets asked on a fairly frequent basis. So hopefully this slide really sets it out in clear terms that ELMS is the umbrella term for the 3 different schemes that sit beneath it. So the Sustainable Farming Incentive, Countryside Stewardship, and Landscape Recovery. So as I said right at the start this year, quite a lot has already happened in terms of ELMS, and we've had a review of countryside stewardship payment rates at the start of the year, followed by the environmental land management update, which Defra published a couple of weeks ago. So I'm just going to pick up on the headlines of that. So taking the Sustainable Farming Incentive, we've got 6 new standards which have been added to the 3 existing standards which were launched in June 2022. 19 new actions, and we're led to believe that the 6 new standards will be available to be applied for in summer 2023. This slide, I know there's a lot of detail on there. It is available on the CLA website, but gives a summary of what that SFI 2023 offer looks like. There's a reasonable amount of duplication in terms of what's on offer in terms of the countryside stewardship offer, but there are some new things coming through there. So of those 19 actions, 7 are completely new, including some of those in the hedgerow management standard, the IPM standard, nutrient management as well. This is good news as far as the CLA is concerned. This whole idea of bringing forward SFI standards earlier than anticipated, earlier than planned, is something we've been pushing for a good chunk of last year. So it's good to see that come through. In terms of the rest of the environmental land management update, picking up those 2 other ELMS schemes, so taking countryside stewardship, we know now that before that second component of ELMS may have been called local nature recovery, the update that we had a couple of weeks ago confirmed that we're going to be sticking with countryside stewardship scheme, which is good news again as far as the CLA is concerned, something that we were recommending towards the end of last year. It's a scheme that's built up a good reputation. The administration's been improving year on year, as the RPA have shown. So part of that announcement was the confirmation of the revised payment rates, which were announced right at the start of the year at the Oxford Farming Conference. That includes the updated revenue payment rates, but also the updated capital grants, which is really good to see, something we've been asking for a long time. We know that more options are going to be added into countryside stewardship, and there's a general principle that the offer is going to be built on, it's going to be improved as we go through the transition, with perhaps some of those improvements we've seen to SFI, rolling application windows, perhaps quarterly payments as well, may be adopted into countryside stewardship going forwards. And then landscape recovery, that third component of ELMS. Last year we had 22 projects that were announced for funding. The update a couple of weeks ago also included news on a second round of landscape recovery projects. So these are large-scale, 500-hectare, minimum-size projects, often delivered in collaboration with various different land managers. And another round of 25 new projects has been announced, and that will open for applications later this year. They'll be expected to deliver on 3 different themes: so protected sites, net zero, and habitat creation. So do all schemes equal ELMS? I think the answer to that is no, which we're quite keen that people sort of start to get their heads around the distinction. You've got those 3 schemes I've talked about in the previous slides, but there are lots of other schemes out there as well. Some focused on farming, particularly farming equipment, funding new and innovative equipment, new farming infrastructure. You've got grants targeted at those farming in protected landscapes, so national parks, areas of outstanding natural beauty. You've got research and innovation funding. You've got the animal health and welfare pathway as well. So it's not just about ELMS, and there's a huge amount more on offer through the transition. You've got free advice as well, included under the Future Farming Resilience Fund. And then the England Woodland Creation Offer, which at the moment sits separate to ELMS, is also included. That's also benefited from revised payment rates that were effective from the start of this year. So this timeline, some of you might have seen it already. It's available on the CLA website, but really is an illustration of the various different schemes that are on offer through the transition, and highlights that it's not just all about ELMS, but there are lots of different schemes as well that might be of interest. This is kept up to date and is available on the CLA website under the Agricultural Transition Hub. So finally, I just wanted to finish there because I know you'll be eager to get into the Q&A, and emphasise that the CLA is here to help whether you've got any questions, any feedback on the schemes. We're running another series of agricultural transition roadshows throughout March and April. I'll put a link in the chat to that in a second. Really recommend that you sign up to those and come along to those. We'll be joined by DEFRA representatives as well as providers under the Future Farming Resilience Fund, and there'll be an opportunity for you to come and ask questions directly of us and of DEFRA representatives as well. We've also got guidance notes on the CLA website on all the schemes on offer through the agricultural transition funding database that's shortly going to be uploaded. So please just make the most of it. We're eager to hear from you, and I'll finish there. Janet, I know you're on next, and you may want to clarify or pick up any points that I haven't addressed. So I'll stop sharing there and hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Cameron, and thanks very much everybody for dialing in this evening, and to the CLA for both inviting me along, but also for your ongoing critical friendship, which is really important to us, because what we're doing here in DEFRA is only going to succeed if it works for farmers, and CLA do a great job of holding us to account and making sure that what we're doing is working for farmers. As you can hear from Cameron, a number of the things that we're doing now are things that CLA colleagues have been asking us to do. So massive thanks for your ongoing engagement, and I'm sure it's frustrating sometimes, but we really do appreciate it. I'm just going to speak very briefly, because I want to leave plenty of time for questions, just to give an overview of what I'm responsible for and what I can answer questions about, and what we're trying to do here. So what we're doing is three things. We're trying to improve our service for farmers, and that is the most important thing we've got to do, because if we don't treat you fairly and with respect and in a proportionate way, then we can't expect you to engage in the things that we want you to engage in. So that includes the way we manage regulation, which we're trying to make much fairer and more proportionate, as well as effective where it matters, where those who are letting the site down need to have a credible risk of being caught and having some consequences to that. But for everybody else, you don't need us coming down hard on you because you've made a minor error on your paperwork or some other breach that's of no material consequence. You need us to be clear, fair and proportionate, and that's what we're trying to do. And in our services, we're trying to make them much simpler and clearer and faster and fairer. And I hope you can start to see some evidence of that now. If you've had a visit from the RPA, or if you've tried to apply for the Sustainable Farming Incentive since we launched it last year, you should see things being simpler, clearer, fairer and faster. But that's what we're all about, to try and get to a position where you see us as people who respect you, respect your role in producing food and other important produce, and are here to try and help you succeed and want you to succeed, and are here to help, like your vet or agronomist would be here to help too. So we're trying to improve our services for you and the way that we work with you. We're also offering a range of schemes. As Cameron outlined, we've got our 3 environmental land management schemes, the Sustainable Farming Incentive, Countryside Stewardship, and landscape recovery, and no doubt you'll have loads of questions about that. And we published a lot of information about that just the week before last, about what we're going to pay for through those schemes and how much we're going to pay, so that you can have the information you need to plan ahead. And we know that information is really crucial to you, and I'm really happy to answer any questions you've got about that. And we also are offering a range of one-off payments, and that's grants to co-finance investment in productivity improvements, developing or testing or applying innovative approaches, or improving your animal health and welfare, or improving your slurry management. And those are all capital one-off payments to go alongside the ongoing payments that we offer through those schemes. So we've got improving our service, we've got our environmental land management schemes, and we've got our range of one-off grants. And by doing that range of things, as we phase out the policies and subsidies of the Common Agricultural Policy, what we're trying to do is achieve 3 sets of outcomes all at the same time. We want to maintain domestic food production, we want to see productivity improve in the farming sector, and we want to see it as a vibrant, competitive, thriving sector. And we also want to see better and more outcomes for climate and the environment from the countryside. And the reason we want to see that is because farmers look after 70% of the countryside in England. And if we're going to achieve the ambitious targets government has set to reverse the decline in biodiversity in our country, to improve our response to climate change, to improve water quality, then it's farmers that we need to do a lot of that work, and we need to pay you and recognise you for the work that's involved in that alongside producing food. And we don't see that as a choice between one or the other, as many farmers are already doing. We see food and nature as going hand in hand, and we think they can and must go hand in hand if we want to have food security in the long term, and if we want to achieve those outcomes for the environment and for the public. So that's what we're here to achieve. We're trying to do this in a genuinely collaborative, consultative way. So we are working with more than 5,000 farmers. We work with organisations like the CLA and others to understand what's working, what's not working, what can we fix this week to make things work just that bit better, and what great leaps can we take to make things work much better for you. And we are always looking for people to take part in that. So if you haven't been involved so far and you'd like to be, then do get in touch afterwards. I'm very easy to find on the internet, on either Twitter or the Farming Forum, or you can always email me. I can't post anything in the chat, but my email address is janet.hughes@defra.gov.uk, and maybe I'll repeat that at the end if you didn't have your pen ready then. But also you can ask the CLA, they know how to get in touch with me. If you've ever got any questions or suggestions, or you want to get involved, please do get in touch. And just as an example of how we are improving as we go, the offer that we're putting forward in the Sustainable Farming Incentive this year is quite different to what we thought we were going to do. It's much more, it contains twice as much scope as we previously planned, because we need to offer a broader, more compelling offer to farmers, so that the scheme, you can do multiple options, and therefore the value of the scheme is going to add up to something worth you participating in, but also so that there's a good range of offers for all the different types and locations of farms. But we've also made the scheme much more flexible. So there isn't any bundling together of actions in SFI in 2023. You can choose from the 19 actions which ones you want to do, where you want to do them, how much land you want to do them on, and that's up to you to choose the combination that's going to work for you. There's no requirement to do a certain percentage. There's no requirement to do different actions in combination with each other at this stage. We are going to keep that under review because we need to get to a point where we do see the right combinations of actions taking place at the right level of ambition, at the right scale, and joined up across local areas. And we're looking to introduce additional incentives and payments and other encouragements and enticements to inform you so you can make informed choices, but also incentivize you to do the combinations of things that we want to see that will really get that impact in the countryside. So this year, the SFI offer is much broader, it's much more flexible for you to apply on your farm. And that's all in response to feedback and input that we've had through farming organisations, individual farmers in our pilots, in our tests and trials, in our practitioner working groups. And we're always really grateful to hear feedback, and we're always open to continuing to improve the way that we're putting forward these offers so that they really work for you, because if they don't work for you, then they're not going to work for anybody. So it's really important to us that that happens. So I'm looking forward to your questions this evening. If you don't get a chance to ask your question, don't worry, we will sweep up questions that are left in the Q&A and do you a written response, but also you're welcome to get in touch anytime if you've got questions and you want to follow up. We're always happy to engage. Thanks very much.
Try to speak.
Technical issues, I think, at our end, Janet, but I think Mark's just about to, should be just about to jump back on and start asking some of these questions.
This happens to all of us. I'm glad it's not me on this particular occasion.
I'm happy to kick us off. I have seen some of these questions, so does that sound good?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's crack on. Mark can join us when he's got his tech issues sorted out.
That sounds good. So yeah, Mark did say this right at the start, but this is one of my favourite ones at the moment, which will be good for you to answer. And we've had the soil standards from last year. Got another 6 new SFI standards as well. Is it going to be possible to stack those on the same parcel of land? So could you get paid for some of the soil standards actions, some of the IPM actions, some of the nutrient management actions? Thanks.
Yeah, so we want all of our different options that we're putting forward. We want maximum flexibility for you to be able to combine them in a way that's going to make sense for your farm. So we want you to be able to be in both countryside stewardship and SFI. This year, if you're in HLS, you can also have a CS agreement alongside that. If you want, you can apply for that in this year's round of countryside stewardship, and you can stack SFI options on top of each other. The only exceptions to that are that we can't pay you for the exact same, we can't pay for the same action twice on the same piece of land through different schemes or options or what have you. And we can't pay you for 2 actions that are incompatible with each other. So if you've already said in countryside stewardship, I'm converting this field into woodland, then we can't also pay you to manage it as, say, unimproved grassland, because those 2 things are not compatible. So there's the compatibility rule and the paying you twice for the same thing rule. Other than that, you can stack as you like. And we will publish detailed guidance on this in relation to the SFI 2023 offer very shortly, so that you can see exactly what the different things are that you can combine together.
Great. I mean, that very shortly will be of interest to a lot of people, because a lot of the feedback that we've had so far is, great to see this headline sort of direction of travel, but in terms of what it actually means for us and whether or not we can apply, they really sort of need that next level of detail before they can submit an application or work out whether they want to. Yes,
and so we'll get that out certainly before you start applying for the scheme, but we'll do it as soon as possible, working through it now to work out what's the maximum level of flexibility we can possibly apply to this, whilst not doing something unfair, because it's not really fair to pay one person twice for doing something and everybody else just once. So we've got to protect against that. I should say that bit of complexity about overlaps between schemes is temporary, because where we're going to end up is we're going to have some actions which we offer through SFI on SFI terms and conditions, and some actions which we offer through countryside stewardship. And the things in SFI are going to be things that we want to see adopted at scale, that you can do in the course of your farming, that are fairly standard and straightforward to deliver, regardless of sort of which particular bit of the country you're in, and that we want to be really accessible to everybody. We want everything to be as accessible as possible to everybody, but particularly those things that are in the course of your farming, you ought to be able to do, for example, without needing your landlord's consent, because it's just something you're doing while you get on with your farming. Countryside stewardship will be more focused on the sorts of actions that are specific to a particular location or habitat that might require advice or consent or permission or some level of bespoking to be able to be done on your land. And the idea is you can choose a mix of those actions that works for you. At the moment, we've still got some things in countryside stewardship that will end up being offered through SFI, and so there is some complexity while we roll them out, but we will look to simplify that as quickly as we can and provide as smooth a path as we possibly can for everybody to get on to the new set of arrangements swiftly and smoothly.
Thanks. Just in terms of the timing of when people should apply, for those that are sort of thinking about submitting an application now but waiting for these new standards to come online, what's your advice to them? Are they better off to wait until the summer, or can they apply for the source standards now and have the opportunity to add them in sooner than the
sooner you're in? So the way it works is you apply, and then we turn around your application at the moment within 2 weeks for most people, often much faster than that, and then you start the following month, and then you get paid 3 months after that. So worth joining now, start getting paid, why not? And then you can add the other standards in once they're available this summer. If you want, you can wait for them all to be available, but why not crack on now and get started and start getting paid?
Thanks. And can you explain a little bit more about how the existing standards, they've got these different levels of ambition that you can kind of work your way up, and the kind of different approach you've taken to the 6 new standards?
Yeah, so in the soil standards last year, there are 2 aspects to the way we did that, both in the pilot and in the soil standards that we launched last year, which we did for good reasons, but which we think are actually not working as we would like them to work. And once you particularly start looking at lots of different standards and how they interact with each other, as we're doing in the pilot, having standards with bundles of actions and levels of ambition can start getting very complicated once you've got more than 2 or 3 standards on any particular area of land. So we've learned a lot from our SFI pilots about how these different SFI standards work. And the 2 particular elements I'm talking about are, the first thing is we bundled actions together. So for example, in the soil standard, there are 2 or 3 things that you need to do at the introductory level, and you have to do all of them. So it's an all or nothing approach, which means that's quite helpful if you just want to know what things go together. And some pilot participants have said to us, that's quite helpful because I don't have to work out which options to do. You can tell me, but it's not very good if you don't want to do one of the 3 things, because that means you can't get access to any of them. And then secondly, we've got these levels of ambition, which are really good from the perspective of helping you to increase your ambition over time. But also, if you're already operating at a high level of ambition, you can get recognized for that rather than everybody just coming in at a sort of base entry level. The problem with it is, particularly while we're running CS and SFI alongside each other in the way that we have been doing, is that if you can't do everything in the introductory level for whatever reason, then you can't get into the intermediate level at all. And that means you can be excluded from the whole lot. So it might be that in future we have some element of guided choice like that again in the scheme when we've got the full offer in place, because we do want to encourage people to do the right combinations of things and to increase their ambition over time, and we do want to reward higher levels of ambition. But we came to the conclusion that for this year, doing that alongside countryside stewardship was just a piece of complexity too far and was too restrictive for farmers. And what we want is to make the scheme as flexible as possible for you to all join. And then we'll continue to look, as we get the full offer in place, at how we incentivize and encourage you to do the right combinations of things at the right levels of ambition. So for now, the things that we're introducing in 2023 are just standalone actions, and you can do as many or as few of them as you want on as much or as little land as you want. The soil standards will stay as they are. And then next year, when we've got the full SFI offer in place, we'll think again about how do we incentivize those right combinations of actions. So it's much simpler this year. It's just a list of things and you pick which ones you want to do, and that's that. There's no more complexity to it than that, really.
Thank you. In terms of what other standards that we might see down the track, you're able to give us a bit more detail on what we might get next year, perhaps the year after? Yeah,
so we'll publish a full plan on this. We need to review the plan because we brought forward quite a lot of the content we had planned to do next year. We brought that forward to this year. So now we need to have a little look at what else it was that we had on our agenda and what's the right time to introduce that. We want to introduce as much as possible. We'll introduce everything in the prospectus by the end of will be available by the end of next year, but we want to do it as early as possible in that year. We'll publish this year as soon as we can, certainly by the summer, the details of which things are going in which scheme and what does the rest of SFI look like beyond this year. The sorts of things we've still got in our sights for SFI include any more actions on water quality, additional levels of ambition and actions for moorlands, where at the moment you can get paid to assess the condition of the moorland, but there's a whole load more actions that we want to pay for that we think are suitable for SFI, and they're outlined in the information that we published just a week or 10 days ago. We've got dry stone walling, agroforestry still on the agenda. We brought forward most of the actions we were going to put into a biodiversity or water body buffering standards to this year, but we'll still carry on working on that. And we're also continuing to look at other aspects where we'd like to be able to support these activities, but we're not quite sure how in an incentive-based scheme. And they include no-till type approaches and precision technology, whether that's about how you apply your inputs or how you assess what inputs are required. And we need to continue working on exactly how do we support those types of activities, what's the right way to do it. And if we can find a way, then we'll introduce those as well next year. So we'll publish the full plan. We did publish all the actions that we want to pay for. We did that 10 days ago. We're just reviewing our plan as to which things go in which scheme and how can we make this as simple and straightforward as possible for farmers. And then we'll publish the finalised plan on that basis.
Thank you. We've heard quite a lot in recent years, I suppose, about the reform approach to inspection and monitoring of new schemes going forward. It's a question we get a lot, is, you know, what's the philosophy? How's that going to be delivered on the ground? Are you able to explain a little bit more about the sort of rationale behind that?
Yeah, so this is really important, and it's not something that's going to happen. It's something we're already doing, and we just need to continue doing it and continue doubling down on it. So we're moving away from a situation where we had a very precise, some have said nitpicking approach to the way we do inspections, both in terms of cross compliance and in terms of schemes. And there were reasons for that at the time, because anytime there was a breach, we had to pay a fine to the EU, and we didn't want to do that. And so a decision was taken that we shouldn't tolerate any breaches, and that's why the inspections were so strict. But they were also strict because of the way the policy was designed, which was very detailed prescriptions of do this thing on this date with this exact combination of seeds, regardless of where you are in the country or whatever. And what farmers have said to us is those prescriptions are much too rigid and much too detailed. You need to give us more flexibility. And we've also realized that as soon as we put a prescription into a scheme, we have to control for it. So if we say it has to be 100 centimeters, then we need to turn up with a tape measure to see if it was 100 centimeters or not, because that's what we said. So we have to control it for audit purposes. So the first thing we're doing is designing the actual rules of schemes to be much more flexible. So instead of saying do this thing on this date, we might say do it over the winter, whatever that means in your particular location. And instead of saying sow this exact mix of seeds, we might say have some cover in place with at least 2 species in it, and you work out which ones are the right ones for you. So much more flexibility in the prescription means much more ability to be pragmatic in the controls. And then when it comes to the controls, we're taking a much more proportionate approach. So whereas previously the only recourse if we found a breach was to issue a penalty, now our site officers, because they're not called inspectors anymore, have much more discretion to be able to give you advisory notes and warnings. And it's much more of a 3 strikes and you're out type policy, unless you are committing some kind of egregious act of harm, or you blatantly have been in a scheme and done absolutely nothing at all and are committing fraud, in which case you're banged to rights, I'm afraid. But for most people who are trying to do the right thing, if something doesn't quite pan out as expected, or you did everything you were supposed to, or there was some kind of misunderstanding or whatever, then the first step is a conversation that we'll have with you. And only then, if you repeatedly don't do anything about it, would you get into serious breach territory. And then in SFI, even if you are in serious breach territory, we might stop paying you for something. We might ask you to pay us the money back for something if you've blatantly not done it, or you've been willfully failing to deliver it in the right way, in a very significant way. But there aren't any penalties on top of that. We don't have the legal powers to apply penalties. And what we're trying to do with all of these changes is bring about a much fairer, more proportionate, trusted way of doing scheme controls that people can say, well, that's fair enough. Obviously, if you commit fraud, something should happen to you, but I'm doing my best here. It just so happens that we had a drought last year and my seeds didn't establish despite me doing all the right things, and therefore I didn't have quite the right degree of cover. So that's fair enough. And so we want to be much more fair and pragmatic and proportionate, because that is what will make people think it's worth engaging with these schemes, and they won't if they think we're going to be unfair and disproportionate because they're risking losing all the money through some innocent mistake, and that we can't have that. That's no good. We want people to engage in this. And we also want to target our enforcement efforts on regulation to where it actually matters, because loads of farmers I've met have got a story about how they've been fined for some paperwork error, but matey down the road is willfully discharging slurry into the river every Tuesday, and nobody seems to care about that. So we're trying to flip that on its head and properly target enforcement where it actually matters, and leave the rest of you alone to crack on, and be helpful where we can to help you succeed. So that's what we're doing. We've already done this in cross compliance. We've massively reduced the number of complaints about cross compliance because of this approach. We've already implemented this approach now in all of our schemes. Everybody's on domestic terms now, so we've got everybody onto this more proportionate approach in terms of advisory notes rather than going straight to penalties. And we will carry on. We've just been testing in our pilot our approach to visits to make them much more supportive. And we are getting feedback from farmers saying this, but they all, interestingly, all the farmers who've had a good experience of a visit think it was just a one-off. So we need to get to critical mass where people accept that it is actually a new way of doing things, not just a one-off because they happen to have a nice inspector. And we need to make sure we're consistent across the board with it. And that's something we've got to carry on working on. Hi, Mark. Looks like you've managed to join us.
Well, I have. Yeah, I've joined on a different machine because the other one stopped working, which was very stressful. But Cameron has been a star in carrying through with the questions. And I'm so pleased to see that many people are participating. I want to sort of link a final question on SFI with a switch over into countryside stewardship, and with a specific focus on the uplands and moorland, because I know you've got a moorland standard within SFI. It's just over £10 a hectare, and there's a small amount to do with the management side. But for those people who are already in countryside stewardship or HLS, are you planning to give those upland and moorland farmers something extra? Because £10.30 is not very much. And I know a lot of our members are very concerned as they see their basic payment falling.
Yeah, so I've been asked this question a lot too, and we do work closely with upland farmers to try and make sure that the range of things that we've got on offer is going to work for them. And we also work with all other kinds of farmers too, because we want this to be a comprehensive offer that's attractive to everybody. In respect of the uplands, so one of the things that we've done twice in the last 2 years is increase prices in countryside stewardship for everybody in that scheme, regardless of when they entered, because we know a lot of people already have agreements and we don't want them to miss out. So we want them to be paid fairly. So there's no disparity in the payment rates between old schemes and new schemes. And we've just increased the prices this January for both capital and revenue rates in countryside stewardship. For those who are in HLS, who will be saying, well, you haven't increased our prices. No, we haven't, because in general, we still think you're getting a relative to CS, we still think is a good price. However, you can both extend your HLS agreement by 5 years if that's what you want to do, and then transfer across to CS if that's what you'd like to do on a date of your choosing. So there's no gap now between the end of HLS and the start of another one, which was affecting a lot of upland farmers. And also from this year, you can have a countryside stewardship agreement alongside your HLS if you'd like to do that. So you can extend your HLS for 5 years and also have a CS agreement rather than change, because you can't change your HLS. If you want to do more things and take advantage of the additional options, and you can come into CS and do that there. We've also brought forward some of the options that are more relevant to those who are farming, particularly on low input grassland, which many hill farmers will be, not in the moorlands obviously, but next bit down, from 2024 to 23. And in particular, although some of those options are also available in CS, offering them through SFI means that if you're a tenant farmer in an upland situation or a grassland situation, you'll now have much easier access to these options, because the SFI agreement is 3 years instead of 5. You don't need landlord consent, and you can also leave early if you lose management control of the land unexpectedly during your agreement. So it's much more flexible terms. So that's also helpful. And then finally, 70% of protected landscapes are in uplands, and the farming and protected landscapes scheme we've just announced we're going to increase and extend, so that if you're in one of those situations, that's not everybody in the uplands, but if you are in that situation, there's more access to that scheme because it's been really popular. And then finally, there are more options coming for the uplands, and we set those out last week in the information that we published, both in SFI, where we're going to pay for more options for those in the moorlands. All the other options are technically available to you if you've got the right kind of land and assets and stuff. So I would look at the wider range of that offer. And then there are additional options coming in 2024 as well in countryside stewardship. So there's quite a lot more on the table now than there was last year in terms of increased prices, a wider range of offers. There's more coming, and I would encourage any upland farmer to look in the detail at what we've put forward, because we think we have put forward quite a lot that ought to be of interest to you. There is also the animal health and welfare pathway that I've not mentioned, where you can get the free annual vet review. And if you've not done that yet, then I urge you to as well, because that can really help with your productivity apart from anything else. And we are getting good feedback about that from those who've taken part in the early rollout of it. So we're always open to continuing to keep this under review. If there's anybody on who thinks they've got a great idea about something we should pay for in the uplands that we haven't covered in our publication, then I really want to know about it, because we're always keeping this under review and we'll carry on refining it. So please keep in touch if you think there's something missing, but do look at the detail of what's on offer, because I hope you'll see that there is a decent chunk of stuff there that you can get involved in.
Thank you. Now, just to add to that, we've had a question in about layering. I know you've talked about stacking and stacking of options within SFI and not paying for the same thing twice. But what happens when you consider the private market and the specific question about biodiversity net gain, and also linking in with countryside stewardship / higher level scheme, depending which scheme you're in? Has any guidance been set out with regard to layering in those type of private schemes?
So this is a really important question. It's important to a lot of people. We know what we've done so far is that we've said in SFI, you can have private funding alongside SFI if you want, that's just fine, but that we will have to keep that under review. And the reason we were able to say that now is because the risk of us paying for something that somebody else is already paying for is really very low, given that this is a very new market. There's not a great deal of investment actually happening yet on this. But as it grows, nobody in the market wants to pay for things that somebody else is paying for. So what we've got to do is make really clear in our schemes what specifically we're paying for, so that there's clear space for the private sector to then invest in those things that we're not, and vice versa. In terms of layering, in terms of your CS and HLS, we have now allowed you, as I said, if you're in the HLS, to have a CS agreement alongside, and you can have, if you're in any of those schemes, you can have SFI options alongside, as long as we're not double funding or paying for incompatible actions. The question of how that works between public and private schemes is obviously much more complicated, because we're not in control of the private schemes, and they're new and they're all emerging. The next steps on that are actually more to do with how we manage monitoring and measurement and verification in private schemes, and how the rules of the game of those schemes work. And colleagues of mine in DEFRA are working on the private finance plans and strategy, which will address some of those points. And then in our schemes, the environmental land management schemes, we need to reflect that and make sure that we're operating accordingly. What we want is for you to be able to layer these schemes on top of each other. We have also said in our schemes you can come out of them in order to go into another scheme that's at least as beneficial as the one that you're in. What I don't think we've done yet is said that it's okay if that's a private scheme. So I will take a note away with me this evening to just make sure that we are thinking about that aspect of that particular rule. And what this is, I'm afraid, going to look like is we are going to have to a little bit take a kind of iterative approach to this, not because we just fancy it, but because the market is so new. We don't know what all the rules are that we need to have. And what we definitely don't want to do is kill it by inventing 1,000 rules just in case X, Y, and Z might happen, which will kill the whole thing, because we really want you to have access to that range of funding. So there is, the next step is going to be this work on what are the rules of the game for the private market? And then you'll see us continue to iterate our schemes to try and make it possible for you to have the two sitting alongside each other as much as possible.
Thank you. Now, fortunately, when we were discussing the development of what was previously called local nature recovery, we collectively agreed that actually we were better to build on countryside stewardship and bring in additional options, which is effectively what you're doing. And we've got increased payment rates, which is very well welcomed by the sector. Now, you're going to bring in other rates in 2024. One specific question's been raised about the talk of bonus payments, which I've talked about for really quite a long time now, to encourage farmers to work in collaboration with each other. And that the Secretary of State has called Countryside Stewardship Plus.
Yes.
And if we can get a multiple paid for those payment rates, it will encourage lots more people to come in. And it's been mooted for 2024. I just wondered at what stage the plans are and how you see it developing.
Yeah, and I saw the question from Mark Bridgman, who I assume is the one and the same Mark Bridgman, formerly of this parish, who is doing some brilliant work up in Northumberland, joining together with lots of other farmers, and was in one of our tests and trials to work out how to do that. So there's 3 different ways we're going to have what we're thinking of as bonus payments or incentives, to put them into civil service language. One is about doing things at the right level of ambition, or to deliver to deliver really outstanding results. So we've done some tests and trials on how we might include an element of payment by results, and we now need to develop what is our preferred approach and test that during this year. The second is rewards for doing the right things in the right places. So in the England Woodland Creation Offer, we're trying this out, where if you plant a tree, you get X amount. If you do it in a way that also improves biodiversity or protects a watercourse, then you get an additional premium on top, because we want to recognise the additional value of you doing the action in that way. And we're really watching closely how that works in that scheme, because we'd like to apply that principle more broadly to environmental land management schemes. And then finally is this one, which we're calling CS Plus, which is where you can go into CS on your own and do whatever options you want to do and get paid the base level payment rate that we just published. But what we want to do is encourage you to do what you're doing in a way that joins up with others in your local area. So for example, if you all do things in your local area that are going to protect your vulnerable catchment from phosphate runoff or nitrate runoff, then there should be a bonus payment. Now, we've done a number of different tests and trials on this. There's general enthusiasm for the idea in principle, but where the rubber hits the road is what happens if somebody in this agreement doesn't keep up their end of the bargain. So 9 of the 10 farmers involved do what they said they were going to do and 1 doesn't. And that's what we've got to work through, because we've got to make sure when we introduce these things that they can be seen as fair and reasonable and not a massive headache for you all to get into, because people don't want to enter into joint agreements. They want to be able to enter into a single agreement. So there's some detail to work through. So in principle, we've said we're going to pay a bonus for joining up across local areas. We need to spend this year now combing over the findings of all our tests and trials again, coming up with some approaches and testing them with farmers to make sure that it does actually do what we want it to do, and it's seen as fair and reasonable, and we can get some decent rules in place that will allow it to work in a sort of pragmatic, proportionate way. So that's where we are in the development of that. Mark, we will be drawing on your test and trial and others in developing that, and we'll be coming back to some of you to say, what do you think about what we've made of your work, before we then look to implement it for 2024.
There's an excellent tax question just to pass by you, Janet, which is actually something that we have taken forward in our submission to the Treasury in advance of the budget. And it relates to whether land that's taken effectively out of agriculture and put into an environmental scheme is still deemed to be agricultural for the purposes of agricultural property relief. Now, in essence, my answer is, of course it is, because you're claiming a scheme from DEFRA. But this is something that we need to confirm through the Treasury. And I just wondered if you could say a little bit about that to our members, who I know have great interest in this aspect of it.
Yes, so we've taken that proposal to the Treasury. It is Treasury who lead on tax policy, so it would be Treasury that would need to answer the question. I know that it's being looked at actively. Further to your suggestions, also this came out of the ROC review. If you've seen the Baroness ROC review of how tenant-landlord relationships work in the sector, this is one of the things that they asked us to look at as well. So that is being looked at actively. There's not much more I can say about it at this point in time. Things are exactly as they always have been for now, but it is under active consideration and review.
Thank you. Can you explain about the income foregone plus cost model? Because I know the previous Secretary of State was keen to move away from that. The current Secretary of State is keen to stay with it, but it does mean that those farming less productive areas are disadvantaged for the same actions. And I'm specifically thinking of those in the uplands. And I just wondered whether there's a way of changing the way that the delivery of public goods is actually calculated to make it seem rather fairer and less disproportionate.
Yeah, so the thing about, so income foregone plus costs, for those who are not familiar with the lingo, is the way that we calculate payment rates in schemes. So we work out how much is it going to cost you on average to do this action. And if you are taking any land out of production or likely to see production go down, we'll compensate you for that as well, looking at average income for that particular action. And so that together gives you income foregone and costs, and that means you shouldn't be making a loss when you do this work, and in some cases you'll be making a profit, in fact, if you're below average on either of those two things. What we have found is that we've looked in our tests and trials at moving wholesale away from that and having different ways of setting prices. Some of the ways we've looked at are things like reverse auctions, which farmers pretty much universally hated as seeming sort of unfair and punitive, or having it all based on payment by results. So it's not about the action, it's about the value of what you're doing. And the thing about that is that approach is very popular among those that are already confident that they know how to get the results and have been doing this for years and years, and maybe they're in a cluster group, maybe they've been in a scheme for years and years, and they really know what they're doing, and they're very happy to say, yeah, pay me for the results, I'll have at it, and I'm very confident I'll get them. That is a minority of farmers. What lots of farmers have said to us is, what if I don't get the results? Do I not get any money then? And so we think we need to have some element of predictable, certain income in the schemes, because for most people, you're not going to go into the scheme and risk not getting any money, having done all that action in good faith when you could have just been cropping the land. Most people don't want to do that. So if you want to have some kind of base payment based on the activity, income foregone plus cost is a bit like democracy. It's the least worst option in terms of how to do that. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it is the least worst one that we can find. So what we've tried to do is update the way we apply that to make it much fairer. And one of the upland options that I've been being asked about on low input grassland, the result of us reviewing that price is that it has multiplied by more than 6 times. So it's not that upland farmers are at a terrible disadvantage of just being left kind of hanging. The price went up from, I think it was £16 to £98 for low to no input grassland management in countryside stewardship, and now also in SFI. But there is, for some of the options, there is a difference between the price of what you get if you're an upland farm or a severely disadvantaged area and what you get if you're in other areas. And that's because there is such a difference in the average income on that land that we think it's the right thing to do to differentiate in that way. Having said that, that is the base level payment. We've just been talking about bonuses for joining up across local areas. We're looking at bonuses for doing things at the right level of ambition and the right combinations and getting really good results, or doing things in the right places. So there's plenty of opportunity there to increase your payments. And also, if you're in an upland setting, there's a wide range of options. Well, like more than half of what's in the prospectus apply. I think it's 130 out of 260 options apply in an upland setting. So there is a big range of things that you can do there. So if you want to increase the value of your scheme, I would have a look at what some of the new options are that have come in the last 2 or 3 years, and what the ones that are coming down the track. I'd have a look at SFI, which you can have alongside your existing agreements, and then look at these extra payments as they come out to see how can you make those stack up. And we will keep this under review. And if someone wants to tell me they've got a much better idea as to how we calculate the base payment, I'd love to hear it, honestly, because at the moment it is the least worst option we can find. But we're open-minded about this. If we can find a better one, then we'll have a look.
Thank you. We've had a good look at SFI and countryside stewardship, and we've touched on HLS. Mm-hmm. We've had a number of questions on landscape recovery. Yeah, which I'll try and group up. Some have asked whether it can include some farming, yes. Whether if you're already in SFI, countryside stewardship, UCO, whether you can transfer them or keep them as part of landscape recovery. And also the final part of it was, do the projects have to deliver on all or just one of the 3 themes for the second round of landscape recovery this forthcoming year?
Great, I can rattle through those. So landscape recovery is the scheme where we pay for longer term, larger scale enhancement of the natural environment alongside food production. It can absolutely be alongside food production, and most of our projects in our first round included food production, and there was no overall net decrease in food production in those projects. They tend to be pursuing a more extensive kind of a model, but that they do include food production. And we've had our first round of these projects last year. These are competitive bids, which we assess, an expert panel assesses them, and then we award contracts to those that we think are going to be the most promising in terms of offering impact and value for money. And we were really pleased with our first round. We had about 50 bids. We were going to award 10 to 15 projects funding. We actually awarded 22. Most of them, and almost all of them, involved groups of farmers working together. So not just one big estate, but lots of farmers working together across a local area. Half of them involved tenants as active participants, and between them, they're going to restore 700 kilometres of rivers alongside food production. So these are really powerful, good projects, which are really popular with farmers if you want to do that particular type of activity. So we're going to run another round of these projects. We're going to do it this spring. You don't have to, you can have farming as part of it. You can transfer out of another scheme into it. That's fine. You would take care of that during your project development phase, which is the first up to 2 years of funding that we award. And we're going to do some market engagement now about exactly how we draw the rules of the scheme. And that's what we did last time. We did some engagement with, we invited anyone who thought they might be interested to come to some meetings where we sounded people out about exactly what the parameters should be and how we should assess bids, and what the kind of, is there an upper limit on how large the area can be, what's a lower limit, etc. So we'll do that market engagement, and then we'll confirm the details very shortly after that. We'll open for applications in April. But we've chosen those 3 areas of focus because, generally speaking, projects don't choose just one outcome, and really good projects will be delivering multiple outcomes. We want to kind of capture that. Generally, you would expect to get a higher score if you could show either a really outstanding contribution in one area or a really good combination across multiple areas. But that's the sort of thing we'll test in our market engagement before we finalise it, because we want to make sure that we do that in a way that's actually going to work and attract bids from the people who are interested in bidding. We learned a lot from the first round as well, so we'll refine the process and the way we do it based on that learning. And we hope that some of those who weren't successful last time will bid again, and we'll also get lots of new bids this time around.
Thank you. I've got a question here, which is, I get asked on quite a number of occasions, and it's quite a good pushback question for you, Janet.
Yeah, go on.
Does DEFRA have a level of food security in mind? And how's this to be achieved with all the measures that are going to remove productive land, as well as others that are going to reduce overall output?
So yes, we do, but there's 2 different things here. One is food security, and that consists of how much food we produce domestically and how much we import and how much we need. And that's a much bigger question. Within that question, the government has a commitment to maintain domestic food production broadly at current levels, and it published that commitment last year. And that's part of our design criteria for our programme, is that we have to assess the impact of everything we're doing on food production, and we have to be able to show that we are both maintaining food production and improving productivity of the farming sector, and also delivering these environment outcomes, which is what makes my job super interesting. And it is indeed the best job in government. So hands off if you fancy my job, because I won't be leaving for some time, because I love it. That's one of the reasons, because it is a proper conundrum how you do that. And the way we do that is by, actually, a lot of the actions that we pay for are things that you can do in the course of your farming that actually over time can make your productivity and production more resilient, and reduce your costs and increase your profit margin and be good for your business. So for example, if you manage nutrients in a careful, optimized way with input from a qualified specialist, then you might be able to reduce your cost with no particular impact on your yield. Same with pests, same with looking after your soil over time. All of these things can be beneficial to you. So there's a whole chunk of actions that we're paying for that are in that sort of category. Where we're paying for actions that are on land that's not being used to produce food, let's say, often that'll be existing habitats. So if you've got some existing scrub or existing woodland or a river or a pond or whatever, then we want to pay you to look after that alongside your food production. So that's not taking land out of production, it's getting an income from all of your assets on your farm, including those that are producing environmental goods. And then where it is about taking land out of production, most of the examples I've seen of farmers doing that, they do it on their less productive areas of land, which are either difficult to farm because they're constantly flooding, or their sheep keep trying to kill themselves on it, or it's really difficult to farm for whatever reason, or it's a really steep slope or whatever. And farmers use options in countryside stewardship to take those areas out of production, get an income from them, and improve their productivity on the other areas. So that's often the way that people apply these schemes, and rationally that's what you do. You wouldn't take your most productive land out of production and whack a scheme on it, would you? You look at your less productive areas. And then there are going to be some areas where people want to take land out of production at a larger scale, and we do need some of that in order to achieve the Environment Act targets, but that's got to be balanced against the food production and productivity goals that we've got. And that's why in our hierarchy of how we want to achieve these targets, we start with things that can be achieved in the course of your farming. and things that can be achieved around your farming without having any sort of negative impact on production. And those who really know how to who are entrepreneurial with these schemes and know how to use them are making an income from both and not reducing their production necessarily. But not, by the way, you've got to make a decision on your farm about what the right mix of things is and what's the right balance for your business. What we want is to make it normal for you to be considering in your farm business the range of ways to make an income, including from environmental schemes as well as food production. And then you decide on your farm what's the right thing to do.
So I think that's a very important message, actually, and it's something Cameron touched on earlier on by explaining about the productivity grants that you've got that you might like to elaborate on. We've had those come and close, and you've got plans for a farm equipment and technology fund, more money for the farming transformation fund, to try and help farmers become more productive. Alongside that, somebody's raised the question, quite rightly saying, well, this is all quite complicated. And I need to find somebody to help me. I need to look at the compatibility of the rules. Can I take it in from this scheme and put it into another scheme? And that, I suppose, is something that we as an association can help our members with, but the RPA no doubt need to help applicants with, and also there's a role for DEFRA. So I just wondered if you might say how, from government side of things, you're hoping to promote the productivity message, but also help with the existing schemes.
Yeah, it's a really important point. So we are in the habit in government, and it's not just true in DEFRA. I've worked in all different bits of government. We do this all over government. I don't really know why, but everything we do has to have its own special name and its own special rules. And you've got to work out what the 30 things are that might apply to you. And that's really not very helpful. So one of the things we're going to do is start offering all of these different things through one integrated service in language that you would use rather than made up policy language. So you won't need to care whether it's an SFI option or a CS option, for example. You'll go online and see there's these different things that I can do, which are the ones I want to do, and we'll make it really easy for you to find the ones that are relevant to your particular farm setting. And same with grants, where we currently have lots of different types of fund for different types of purposes, and you need to be an expert in DEFRA Speak to understand which grants are going to be and when the windows are, etc. What we're going to do shortly is start publishing a much longer forward look of what all the grants are that are coming, so you can plan ahead, so that you don't have to be fingers on the buzzers ready when we just happen to open the window, but you can see, oh, there's going to be this many rounds of, let's say, slurry management grants, or this many productivity rounds, and this is when they're going to be, and you can plan ahead and see what's in them. So you shouldn't have to pay someone to find that information out for you. And also we've got a rolling application window for SFI where you can apply whenever you want and you can start whenever you want. And we really want to extend that to all our schemes and as much as possible to our grants as well. It's a bit more tricky with grants, but we really want to be able to enable you to apply when it makes sense for you to do so in a planned way, without us springing surprises on you or hiding things behind funny policy names. So that's the direction of travel. It will take us a while to get there. You should see some improvements to the online service now. If you go and look at SFI, you don't have to work out what the compatibility is between SFI and CS. We'll show you. If you're in CS already, then in this field, you've got a CS option around the outside. We can't pay you to do the SFI option on that, but you can have the SFI option in the middle of the field if you want. Would you like to do that? So that you don't have to do the working out, and we don't have to check your working out either, which is what makes the process so much quicker. So we're going in that direction already. It requires us to build some technology. If you've been at this for a while, you'll know that DEFRA has not always covered itself in glory when building technology. So we're trying to do that in a cautious, careful way to make sure it really works for you. But over the next 18 months to 2 years, you will see a lot of improvement in this area, so that it is much more straightforward for you to see what's on offer, apply for it yourself and manage it yourself. And then if you're paying somebody, it should be to be providing substantive advice to you that's actually helpful to you and helps you get the right funding or the right kind of combination of actions on your farm, not because we've made things so blooming complicated, you've got to pay someone to decipher it for you. For me, that's a kind of a moral mission really that underpins all this. It's part of our service improvement mission. It's just not right. You should have to pay someone to fill a form in because we made it so complicated. So we are on a relentless mission to make that not be a thing anymore.
Well, Janet, that's very, very encouraging. I think one of the last questions I'm going to come to, and I'll just have a scroll through the other questions, see how we're doing. But I know a lot of farmers and land managers and members of our association have been involved in the co-design process, ELMS tests and trials, workshops, working groups. I think Some have felt that maybe it's stopped, and maybe some of the ideas that they haven't been taken on board. And some have felt, well, maybe co-design has stopped. I know from my own perspective and the perspective of my team here at Belgrave Square that we spend a lot of time trying to design these schemes to best effect with you. Mm-hmm. But I wondered if you could just explain to the person who asked the question as to how you consider the whole co-design process will go on from now.
Yeah, so I think it definitely has not stopped. Far from it. We're doubling down on it, but we're now into the phase where we're really developing the details around. So we had for the SFI standards, we had a number of practitioner working groups working with us to work out what should these standards look like, what should we pay for, how can we really make this work for farmers. We've had our tests and trials. We've still got some of those ongoing as well, looking at specific issues. So we've got one, for example, looking at the moorlands question and how our standards work in the moorlands and how we might improve that. So we've got various different ways that we are engaging with people. I think what we haven't done well enough in the past is play back what we did about that engagement, and we've tried to do that much better this time around by saying, look, this is how we've changed SFI based on all the engagement that we've had and the input that we've had. There are some things that we did in test and trials which bluntly we just weren't ready a year ago to really think about in any detail. So until you know what you're going to pay for, there's not a lot of point trying to come up with your detailed proposal about how you're going to spatially target it. So there's a bit of sequencing here. So if we engaged with you on something like that and we haven't quite finished that off yet, that's just because we were trying to get the information out about what is the set of things we're going to pay for first, and that's the kind of foundation, and now we can come back to those questions. So there's some engagement going back certainly 2 or 3 years. I was talking earlier about these bonus payments for local join-up where tests and trials were concluded more than a year ago. We're going back over those again now to see what do we do. So sometimes the things that you've done with us don't come to fruition immediately, but you will see them play out later. But then it's also fair to say we had a number of tests and trials on whole farm plans. They each came up with a different approach. We can't do all of them. So we've got to somehow, sometimes we do have to pick what are we going to do, and it's not going to please everybody. And what we've got to do there is be much better at explaining what we've done, why we've done it, how we considered other ideas, why we didn't take those ones forward at that time. And so we've been working on trying to improve that over this year. I will say we also, towards the end of last year, had a slightly unusual situation in terms of our engagement. So we did go a bit quiet on our engagement from in September, October and November last year, because you might have noticed I had 3 different bosses during that time. So we were quite internally focused during that time, and we are really excited now that we can be back out and about, much more actively engaging and much more engaging in co-design. And we've been able to provide this clarity about what we're doing. So normal service will be resumed, but better is the plan for this year.
Well, Janet, thank you. We've had a whistle-stop tour through so many of the measures within the agricultural transition. It is, as George Eustace said, an evolution and not a revolution. It's taking time. We have had details now for 2022 and 2023. There'll be the opportunity for people to go into countryside stewardship in February and March. And then you've said the summer.
Yes.
We hope it's early summer, Janet, and not late summer for SFI 2023, so that everybody can know where they stand. And as soon as we know details for 2024, particularly payment rates, we very much look forward to seeing those. This webinar has been recorded. It will be there on our website. I know that we can make sure that the links that Janet and her team have are made available to everybody. And do please participate in the workshops. The full details are there on our webpage. The dates are there. Cameron will be going around with the team and visiting you all in your regions. And do please take advice. Take advice from us, take advice from the RPA and also from DEFRA. So, Janet, thank you very much indeed for giving up your time this evening.
That's all. Thanks for having me.
And particular thanks to Cameron for putting together the slide deck, which will also be available on the website for those of you who weren't able to see the slides earlier on. And fortunately, my technology has resumed, so I'm able to bid you all farewell and have a very successful season. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone.